Hi everyone, James here. Welcome to another video. This is going to be a long overdue VCLT special. Just before I start today, not feeling very well, got some sort of horrible lurgy. I promised myself I was going to get this video done. It's long overdue. Before the summer now really, various people sent me some records and I just didn't get round to doing the VCLT video before I broke up for the summer. So here I am doing it now. What we're listening to here is one of the records sent to me by my very good VC friend John Bellamy. This is Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw and I Hear. This is on the World Record Club label. Yeah, what a beautiful cover, isn't it? And just a really nice album, as you can hear. John, for those of you who don't know, John Bellamy, he's been on the VC for quite a long time, for longer than me. His background is in, I'd say probably, progressive rock, heavy rock, classic pop. But in recent years, he's kind of started getting into jazz, and he shows a lot of really interesting, good jazz things now. He picks things up quite cheaply, often. Shows some very good things though. It's quite interesting, when John's package arrived, I was trying to kind of work out, when people send you VCLT sometimes, you can sort of work out the different categories of VCLT that people send. For example, records that you think this person really wants you to hear. Then there's spare copies of things that they already have. And then there's things that you sort of know that person probably doesn't like, and that's why they've passed it on. I think in this case it's probably just something that John has picked up and enjoyed himself, and perhaps has a spare copy, or he just decided he was going to send it to me. Anyway, so that's Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw and I Hear. Now the next one from John, I suspect falls into the category of records that he has listened to and maybe doesn't like, not really up his street. I could be wrong. This is the Isaac Hayes movement. Get ready for this. Oh yeah. On Stax. Beautiful Stax label. I'm always really delighted to get hold of any Stax records. I don't have that many in my collection. Yeah, John's thing, John says that he doesn't like soul music, but we've gone back and two on this a little bit, and we've sort of established that he probably does like a fair bit of it, and he likes things like Aretha Franklin and so on. But I think John perhaps doesn't categorise certain things as soul, or there's kind of soul that he likes and there's soul that he doesn't like, which is absolutely fair enough. He did send me another couple of things which I couldn't put my hands on, a Gladys Knight and the Pips album, which I listened to that and I could kind of see where he was coming from. You get that very commercial, kind of sweet soul, which is a little bit kind of, candy flossy. This record, now I've got some notes here, because I always come prepared. This is the third studio album by Isaac Hayes. It's the one that came after Hot Buttered Soul, which is known as his more kind of, famous one. This was released in 1970, and the name, actually, the Isaac Hayes movement, apparently he named the group, he wanted a name a little bit like the Jimi Hendrix Experience, so he came up with the Isaac Hayes movement as a name. It was actually provided for him, the name, by Marvel Thomas, who I think was a soul keyboard player. Anyway, this album contains just 4 tracks, 4 really long songs, all of which are cover versions. There's a version of the Beatles' Something, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's a Bacharach David song, I Just Don't Know What to Do With Myself. There's a Chalmers and Rhodes song, One Big Unhappy Family. And there's a Jerry Butler song, great old soul songwriter, who I think used to work with Curtis Mayfield. A song by him called I Stand Accused, which actually opens the album, and it kind of starts with this really long, drawn-out spoken word thing. Isaac Hayes, I always forget when I sort of listen to Isaac Hayes, he's almost a sort of soul crooner, really. He's quite unique. The stuff that he that he put out, it's not like a lot of other soul that you hear. He's got this very deep, mellifluous kind of style of oration almost, you know. He kind of sings in this deep, kind of smooth, sultry croon, you know, I would kind of describe it as, with very lush backing, very opulent kind of soul soundscapes, a lot of space, slow grooves, you know. It's not kind of up-tempo, finger-clicking Saturday night music. It's kind of, you know, something quite different to that. I don't know, I'd be curious to know, John, whether you like this or whether you didn't like it and sent it on to me. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good album. I thought it could have done with perhaps maybe one or two upbeat songs. I mean, the whole thing is kind of a mood. It's kind of slow and quite sort of gospel-y, but slow, with this kind of crooning voice. The only song that I actually think doesn't work, ironically, is the Beatles one, Something, which contains what I think is a fairly sort of misjudged violin solo, which is quite kind of racking on the ears, you know. I'm not quite sure why he decided to put violin on a kind of sultry soul version of Something, but he did. And yeah, for me that's the least successful track, but it's definitely a nice album to put on if you want to kind of chill out with a glass of wine, and it kind of, you know, it sets the mood. Let me see if there's any other facts that I can give you. It was released in November 1970. It spent a total of 7 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Soul Albums chart, and it actually went to #1 on the Jazz Albums chart, which is quite interesting. So anyway, John, thank you. Not an album that I would ever have seen in the wild. If I had have done, I would have picked it up. And apart from the sort of slightly dodgy Beatles thing, I enjoyed it tremendously. That's the Isaac Hayes Movement. Okay, so the next album John sent, I suspect, is one that he really likes, and he maybe had a duplicate, because I know this would tick some of John's boxes. This is Janis Joplin and her album Pearl. I didn't have any Janis Joplin in my collection at all. She's one of those artists that kind of got away, you know. I mean, clearly I know something about her. I've heard her. I've seen, you know, live footage of her and so on. I knew what kind of thing she did. That kind of whiskey-soaked rock soul kind of, you know, R&B thing. Big set of pipes on her, you know, throat shredding emotion. But yeah, I just never picked up anything by her, so I was really delighted to get this. That's her band, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's on CBS. This is the kind of record, I mean, I do this a fair bit. I listen to records like this, and even though I enjoy the vocal performance, you know, whether it be Janis Joplin, whether it be Otis Redding or whatever, but often it's the band that really attracts my ear, and this band, what a band. I mean, there's a couple of instrumental cuts on the album, one of which apparently was recorded just after she died, because she died during the making of this album, so didn't live to see it released. And I think the band did a couple of instrumental cuts, and they are a seriously hot band. They were the Full Tilt Boogie Band, which was her final touring unit. They were a Canadian rock band originally headed by guitarist John Till, and the band was composed of Richard Bell, bassist Brad Campbell, drummer Clark Pearson, and organist Ken Pearson. And I mean, they're just an unbelievable unit, you know. This was her second and final solo album. I mean, she'd done, you know, work with the bands that she'd been in before. Released posthumously on Columbia in January of 1970. Apparently it was her most well-produced album. It was produced by the guy that did The Doors, Paul A. Rothchild, so perhaps fewer rough edges than, you know, previous outings. Great album, truly great. It contains the #1 hit, Me and Bobby McGee. There's songs by Bobby Womack, Chris Christopherson, and yeah, unfortunately she died while making the record, so a great one to have in the collection. Thank you, John, very well chosen. Janis Joplin and Pearl. And the final record that, well, no, not the final. John actually did send me a few other things, and but I just want to keep this video kind of reasonably short, and I've got some other records to get through. So the other stuff that John sent, I'm sure I will end up showing it at some point. This was the other big notable one he sent me. Maybe because we discussed Rainbow. I think he knew I was into Rainbow. This is just not an album that I have ever seen in the wild, really. You know, not since back in the old days when it was kind of in record shops, you know, new. This one won't need too much introduction, I hope. It's one of the most kind of notable records in the heavy rock canon. Let me consult my notes again because I don't want to get anything wrong. This is the second studio album by Rainbow, released in 1976. It was voted the greatest heavy metal album of all time in issue 4 of the heavy metal magazine Kerrang! Ritchie Blackmore put a new band together, I believe, for this record. He retained only Ronnie James Dio from the previous album. It features Cozy Powell. I was about to say the immortal Cozy Powell, but sadly he proved not to be immortal. Bassist Jimmy Bain and the keyboard player Tony Carey. And yeah, I mean, this is a kind of monstrous heavy rock album, full throttle Ritchie Blackmore, classic kind of baroque, classical heavy metal guitar stylings, Ronnie James Dio's inimitable vocal style. Yeah, just one of those kind of cornerstone heavy rock records that everybody should have in their collection, and now I have it in mine, thanks to John. So John, thank you very much indeed for those records. Check John's channel out if you haven't already. He's a great guy. He does some really good videos. He's a great he's a great digger, you know, a vinyl digger par excellence. Okay, this video is getting a little bit longer than I intended, but never mind. Right, next one, Andy Shut, Cloudy Milder.
Hey people of the VC, it's Andy Cloudy Milder.
Was kind enough to send me, right, he sent me a pile of Manic Street Preachers CDs, which I'm working my way through and enjoying those tremendously. For some reason, not a band that I've ever got into, even though they're Welsh, like me. And the record he sent me was this one, Saxon, The Strong Arm of the Law. I think I'd mentioned to him that I'd never really heard Saxon. I mean, I knew who they were. I've got a fairly strong memory from back in the day of you know, knowing people who were into Saxon, but I just kind of never got round to them. One of the kind of founding bands in the movement that came to be known as the new wave of British heavy metal, which is Andy's speciality. If you don't know Andy, he basically collects new wave of British heavy metal records, albums by bands that came up in the 1980s, I suppose, you know, spearheaded by, you know, bands like Iron Maiden, who sort of reinvigorated the metal scene, reinvented it to an extent. And this album is very well regarded. I've checked on sort of Amazon and so on, and you know, people kind of raving about it. Classic collage, gatefold, rare. It's not a label that I know. I was trying to do some research on this, and there wasn't a great deal to be found. I mean, I didn't look very far, I just went on Wikipedia, but I went to look at an interview with Lemmy from Motorhead, and he said that Saxon were a very clean living band. He said they used to tour with them. Motorhead would always be, you know, obviously, you know, with Lemmy, you know, fried on God knows what substances, but Saxon were just sort of, you know, cups of tea and pieces of cake kind of guys. So I think Lemmy was a little bit bamboozled by them. Anyway, so this record, Strong Arm of the Law, their third album, released in 1980, 4 months after Wheels of Steel, and it debuted on the UK chart at number 11. I enjoyed this record. It's very kind of balls to the wall, kind of, you know, metal, screaming guitar solos, quite sort of histrionic vocals, some good hooks and some good riffs, you know. But it's certainly nice to have it because, like I said, I've never bought a Saxon record. I wouldn't have known which one to go for, so you know, clearly it's, you know, it's nice to defer to somebody like Andy who kind of knows what they're talking about and you know, knows which one to send. So I'm pleased to have that. Strong Arm of the Law by the immortal Saxon. Okay, so the final set of VCLT I'm going to show you today, and there are some other sets of VCLT that I need to do. A quick shout out to Martin Parrott and to Headley and to Dr. Robert as well. I'm going to have to do a separate video for that, okay? And I'll do it ASAP, I promise. 6-inch Pianist 319.
Happy days. Cheers.
John Downing sent me some marvellous things. The first thing he sent me, he watched one of my videos. I did a special on Thomas Dolby, and I mentioned that I hadn't got this record on vinyl and that it was quite expensive, not easy to come by in the wild. I think on Discogs it was going for, I don't know, maybe £30–40. I didn't want to spend that money on it. John happened to have it in his record box to go. He didn't like it very much. He was going to sell it, so he thought he might as well send it on. So, what a great gesture, because John, I think you could have got a fair price for this if you'd have sold it on. So, I was so excited to get it. It's a grail, As soon as I saw the flash of the sleeve when I opened the parcel, I was just kind of like, oh, John, thank you. It's quite interesting that John said he didn't like it, because this album was not very well received at the time. It was his third album, and it was a departure from the stuff he'd done already. Thomas Dolby burst onto the scene really doing kind of alt synth pop, I would describe it as, really. And this record, he went down a more kind of funk R&B direction. There's a George Clinton song on here, May the Q Be With You, and George Clinton actually guests on the album. I think it's a great album, but it's not one that's been tremendously kind of admired over the years, I think, by people in general. And sure enough, it was in John's to-go box, but now it's found a new home. So John, thank you very much indeed. Just need to change the record. Okay, so we're on side 2 now of I Hear. Wonderful stuff. Okay, so John also sent me, I think he had a spare copy of this kicking around. I've only started getting into Prince in the last 2 to 3 years. I never got into him in the 80s. I was too busy listening to Pink Floyd and the Scorpions. He just wasn't kind of on my radar at all. About 2 or 3 years ago, I started buying his records on CD, but it was the classic run of kind of big 80s ones, Purple Rain, Sign of the Times, and so on, 1999. And I hadn't heard his early stuff. John sent me this. I think this is Prince's second album. There's a lot of second and third albums in this VCLT. The second album released on October the 19th, 1979, and he recorded it just a few weeks after Warner Brothers asked for a follow-up to his debut, For You, which apparently Prince had not been happy with it. The record company had not been happy with it, so he made this album, and this contains some more kind of slower kind of jams, kind of slow, smoochy kind of stuff, but it does contain some up-tempo material as well. I Want to Be Your Lover. I don't know if it's kind of sacrilege, but I prefer this to the kind of later 80s stuff, even though I do really admire Prince as a songwriter, and I love a lot of his work, but I also find the production on those great, big, successful albums, I find it a bit clattery sometimes, his choice of, he uses drum machines a lot, and if you compare it to, say, Sly Stone, whose music I really love, obviously Prince kind of, styled himself a great deal on Sly Stone, but I prefer the sound of the Sly Stone records, really, to the sound of the big Prince albums. But this is more in keeping with that kind of 1970s analogy, kind of sound, a warmer sound, and what a great album. Absolutely fantastic. John, thanks hugely for this. Again, I would never see Prince albums in the wild. Well, I know I do occasionally see them, but they're not often cheap. So, thank you very much indeed. And the final one that John sent me was this one, and I was really delighted to get this. John had already sent me a Billy Paul record, this one already, and I think I've already done the VCLT video for this one. He sent me this one. This is War of the Gods, and I think John put in his letter, he said, not an easy listen, but a good one, or something like that. And it is quite an intense record. It is a not sure if it's a concept album, but it is quite intense. I believe it's a Gamble and Huff production, so it has that kind of very smooth, glistening, graceful, filly sound to it, you know, but it gets quite sort of heady, you know, quite kind of intense, almost sort of evangelical, very passionate. His vocal delivery is very powerful. Some quite slow songs which you have to kind of give them all your attention. A bit like the Isaac Hayes album, it's not necessarily one that you're going to, you know, pour yourself a glass of wine and start boogieing around the living room, you know, it's got a different vibe to it. Let me consult my notes once again. Okay, it was produced by Gamble and Huff and it was released in 1973, reaching number 12 on the Billboard Soul chart. Thanks for Saving My Life was a top 40 hit, reaching 37 on the pop chart, and was a top 10 soul record, reaching number 9. Billy Paul, apparently Questlove of The Roots, he equated Paul to Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, calling him, and this is a quote, one of the criminally unmentioned proprietors of socially conscious post-revolution 60s civil rights music. So there you go. It was a departure from his previous albums, apparently. It contains only 6 songs, nearly all of which are extended psychedelic song suites. It fuses jazz, soul, funk, Latin, rock, pop, and apparently is unlike most other things in the catalogue. So again, I think not a record that you can get hold of very cheaply, yeah, just really pleased to have it. I think before I finish this video, I think I just need to do this, maybe for the thumbnail. Who's that ugly one in the middle? Okay folks, I'm not quite together today. I think I'm slightly feverish, so I apologise if I've been slightly rambly or a bit kind of unfocused. I hope everybody's doing well. I've been trying to check out and get on top of watching videos this week. It's proved a bit more difficult than usual, so if I've not commented on your latest video, and I normally do, I apologise, I will get to them. A lot of really great videos coming along at the moment, so enjoying keeping up with what you're all doing, and as well as the people who make videos, I want to say a huge hello to the people who don't make videos and who yet tune in to watch, to watch my ramblings. I'm always just so pleased to hear from people, so yeah, thank you very much indeed. Please do leave a comment and I will get back to you as soon as I've had another lem sip. I'll be back soon to do another VCLT video, and I've also got a vinyl finds video for you, and I'm making some other videos as and when I can. I've got some more specials coming up, and so there we go. I will love you and leave you there, so take care folks, and keep spinning that vinyl. Take care. Live long and prosper.